And good morning, everybody, on a beautiful summer's day. I hope it's hot and warm where you are. I hope you've had a wonderful week here at the end of summer. I'm Dwight Moody, the host for Sunday in the House, where we have a red letter Bible lesson drawn from the life and teaching of Jesus to help us navigate our personal and public issues that threaten to overwhelm us sometimes or undermine us or push us off course. Now, it has been a beautiful week. I hope you have taken advantage of some of the unique opportunities of summertime, like going to the beach, spending some time at the beach. I have a whole group of friends who are at the beach this week. Perhaps going to a farmer's market. My wife and I go every Saturday morning, either to the one here in Travelers Rest or as we did yesterday in downtown Greenville. Hundreds, even thousands of people selling all sorts of homemade goods from the garden and from the shop, from the kitchen. Perhaps you've been to a concert. One of the interesting and wonderful things about this part of the country here in the Carolina Mountains is that everywhere, every week, it seems, another small concert. We went up to Hendersonville last night for a group called Highway 52, and they did a 2-hour concert singing the music of John Prine. Good on my soul it was. Maybe you've been out in the garden bringing in tomatoes and corn and tilling up things that are already past their prime. Maybe you've been on a hike on one of the trails or one of the mountains, one of the national festivals. All of these things are good for the soul. They help us navigate the stuff that's hard to deal with, both in our private lives and in the public life. Now, as you know, I've been very focused on public events because the time in which we are living is a traumatic time for many people. Our new president and his people, they came into office determined to disrupt the norms. And they have succeeded in destroying a lot of things. And as I have written, as we've all been watching, they've been building prisons. Now, I wrote about that this week in my weekly column. It's called The New Ice Age. I'm not going to go over that material except to say this. I had a longtime reader of my column unsubscribe this week after reading this column. And I wrote him about it. We had a nice exchange. I'm going to write about that exchange this week. And I encourage you to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. You can go to the website at themeetinghouse.net and subscribe. It's free. I send this out generally on Thursday, a 700-word commentary on something that's happened in my private world or in our public world. And I encourage you to do that. But I'm going to write about what this exchange I had with this man in New York after reading my column. Now, the main focus of this Sunday in the House is always the red letter Jesus. And I put it that way because there's an awful lot of religion in our country, and much of it ignores the teaching of Jesus. Much of it ignores the spirit, the attitude, the disposition of Jesus. So I have vowed in this Sunday in the House, week by week by week, this 30-minute broadcast, I have vowed to focus on the words, the attitude, the disposition, the actions of Jesus of Nazareth, whom we now call Lord. And this series, I did a series on the Jesus and prayer, the prayers of Jesus. There are 6 of them in the gospel accounts. And you could go back and watch all of these. This is broadcast number 30. We started on June the 3rd. And this is number 30. They are all archived. not only on my website at themeetinghouse.net, but also on my YouTube channel, which is at Dwight A. Moody. You can subscribe to that and watch it on Sunday morning or watch it anytime after our broadcast is over at about 9:35. We're in the middle of a series on Jesus and politics. And before I actually turn to the text, I want to summarize what we've been looking at. I have reminded you and myself and everybody that Jesus was very attuned to the political realities of his day. Now, I occasionally have somebody say to me now, as they've said to me before, "Preacher, you need to stay away from politics." Well, this, of course, is what people told the preachers during the great civil rights movement. Just tap it down, preacher. Stay away from that stuff. It divides us. It causes trouble. But of course, Jesus knew this. And he also had political realities that he had to deal with. For instance, over and over again, and this is what I've been trying to show in this series, over and over again, Jesus responded to the political realities of his day. Let me remind you that Jesus' birth itself in Bethlehem was triggered by a political event. And there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. That's Luke chapter 2, verse 1, I think. That is, he had to leave his home, go to another place, according to the Gospel of Luke, in order to register, to be taxed. You know how many ways we have to register now. Register to vote, register to drive, register to get services like email services. Over and over again, we have to register ourselves. And Jesus was registered, his birth was triggered by a political event. Think about this, that his parents and himself, when he was very small, became refugees that was triggered by a political event. The ruler of his country, Herod, got very nervous that Jesus himself was a political leader. And so he, in a fit of rage and self-defense, he decreed that all of the children below a certain age were to be exterminated. Kind of an ethnic cleansing. And Jesus and his parents became refugees, leaving their country and going down into Egypt. Think about this. Do you remember several weeks ago when I talked about what triggered Jesus' public ministry? The gospel says this: when John was arrested, Jesus left Judea, went to Galilee, and started his public ministry. That is, the public ministry of Jesus was triggered by a political event. That is, another preacher, John the Baptist, was arrested because his preaching upset the authorities. They not only arrested him, they eventually beheaded him, killed him, murdered him, just like they would eventually do to Jesus. Several weeks ago, I talked about Jesus and his engagement with Roman soldiers. A Roman soldier had a child that was sick unto death, and the Roman soldier sent couriers to Jesus begging him to come and attend to his child. Now, the point I made in that was that Jesus lived all of his life in a country that was occupied by foreign power and a foreign army. He had to be constantly aware of the dangers and the risk of his ministry because of this. Now, eventually, these soldiers arrested him, and they tried him, and they tortured him, and they murdered him. They crucified him. And then they set a guard over his grave so his body wouldn't be stolen. That is, Jesus, his whole ministry was shaped by the political environment in which he found himself. And Jesus was constantly addressing, insofar as he could, how to survive, how to thrive in these conditions, in these circumstances. This is something that we need to take notice of. We need to learn a lesson from how Jesus did this. And I'm now going to turn to Mark chapter 13, which I started last week. Jesus has two great sermons that are recorded in the Scriptures. One is what we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's about how to live day by day. There's the Beatitudes. There's the Jesus prayer, that is the Lord's Prayer, we call it. And there's a teaching about forgiveness and generosity and prayer and self-control. That's what we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's in Matthew and in Luke. And then we have this sermon, which is in Mark and also in Matthew. Mark chapter 13, which I'm going to be reading from in just a minute, and the 24th and 25th chapters of Matthew. We call it the prophetic sermon of Jesus. Sometimes it's called the eschatological sermon because it deals with the future. And sometimes it's even called the apocalyptic sermon because it uses strange images, apocalyptic images and ideas to get across its idea. Now, you might want to, I'm going to take a break here. Might want to go get your Bible. I've got my little Bible here, my red letter Bible. I'm going to read from it and start again on unpacking this teaching of Jesus because it's full of politics and it's full of personal survival skills. I'll be back in just a minute.
And now this week's Red Letter Lesson.
Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13. Now, you know, I've said this, we call it Mark chapter 13. When it was originally written, it did not have a name like Mark, and it did not have chapters and verses, and didn't even have punctuation. And these things help account for a lot of the diversity between this translation and that translation. Now, I have my red letter Bible, and I'm going to interpret this text in 4 parts, 4 sections. The first section, let me just read this. I touched on it a little bit last week. And as Jesus went out of the temple, one of his disciples, one of his entourage, said to him, "Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings these are," which is a way of saying, wow, look at these stones. Look at this wonderful building. Now, if you've been to Jerusalem, you know that the stones used in the foundation of the retaining walls that were built first, the great Temple Mount platform that was constructed, and then the Golden Dome Temple on top of that, built by Herod the Great. What we have now, of course, was rebuilt by the Muslims, Suleiman the Great, many centuries later. But the foundation stones are still awe-inspiring. One of the great mysteries is, how did they quarry these stones? How did they move them from the quarry to the Temple Mount? And I've always been convinced that they were rolled into place and then squared off. But that's another whole story, another Bible lesson somewhere. But the disciples said to Jesus, "Wow, look at all this stuff." And Jesus said, "Yes, you see these great buildings? There's coming a time when they will not be left one stone upon another. They will all be thrown down." And that was hard for the disciples to take. They loved Jerusalem. They thought Jerusalem was eternal, the city of God. God was going to protect it. God was going to bless Israel. But Jesus said, no, the judgment is coming. The judgment is going to ruin this city. War is coming. Jesus knew this. He understood the political dynamics of what was going on around him. He had great discernment, great understanding, and he knew traumatic times were coming. This whole city, its population, its buildings, are going to be blown up, so to speak. So a little bit later, verse 3 says, he sat down on the Mount of Olives, which was within sight of the temple, and his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, came to him privately and asked him this. Okay, Jesus, tell us, when is all this going to happen? Is there going to be a sign that we should look for? Is there anything that's going to warn us of what's happening? Now, this is the first part of this sermon, what I simply call the questions. These are normal questions. These are questions you would ask, questions I would ask, out of curiosity, out of concern, out of danger, out of a threat to our own existence. Oh, it's all going to be blown up. When is this going to happen? In my lifetime? Soon? Next week? In another decade? Who's going to do this? They wanted to know how this public trauma was going to happen. Sometimes the things that traumatize a nation can be seen a long way off. You can see war coming. You can see, even in our own country, think about when the stock market blew up and ushered in a long period, a whole decade of what we call the Great Depression. It gripped the entire nation, disrupted every single thing in our nation. Private lives, public policy. You have to go back really to the Civil War to find a similar internal issue that blew things up so much. Yes, we've had wars, for instance, World War II, brought about by international affairs. But now here we are in our country in the midst of a very disruptive period. And it promises to be more disruptive over the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years. And we want to know what's going to happen, how can we prepare? Jesus was dealing with the same thing. That's why these passages are so relevant. Well, Jesus heard the questions, and in the next part of this sermon, he warns the people not to confuse what's happening now with the end of the world. This is the great temptation of people in our own time. They think over and over again that the events surrounding us are so important that they signal the end of the world, the end of the age. And that's what's happened in my lifetime. Much of Christian teaching, much of Christian theology, Christian books, Christian movies about the end times when people are going to be left behind. This is because we like to think, well, we're the most important, and whatever is happening in our generation is the most important thing that's ever happened. Well, here's what Jesus says, and I'm going to read this because Jesus is describing not what is happening at the end of the age, but what is happening everywhere, all the time, to everybody. The ebb and flow of trauma and destruction. Let me read it. Take heed, Jesus said. Don't let anybody deceive you. There are going to be many people coming and claim my name, and they're going to deceive many people. Many people who want to know the truth and live the truth and do the truth are going to be deceived, going to be caught up in these teachings about the end of the world. Then he says this, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled about the end of the age. Such things must happen, but it is not the end. This is the words of Jesus. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes in different places, famines, troubles. Is this the end? No, Jesus says this is the beginning. What he means is these are things that happen to everybody all the time, everywhere. This is the way life is. This is just today. We can testify to the truth of this. For century after century, decade after decade, on continent after continent, these things happen. Wars and rumors of wars, nations rising against nation, famines, earthquakes, troubles, birth, struggle, life, death. Nations rise, nations fall, leaders come and go. This is the way life on planet Earth is. Let nobody tell you that these things are, quote, signs of the ends. They're just signs of the day. They're just the way things are. This is what Jesus said. Now, the next part of this sermon, and I'm going to start it today and come back to it next week, is that Jesus did foresee a time of trouble coming to Jerusalem. Now, I want to pause here and make this point. There are people who say you can't criticize Israel. They equate the modern state of Israel with the Jewish people. And they quote this Bible verse where God is quoted as saying, the people that bless you, I will bless. The people that curse you, I will curse. And there are many, many Christian leaders in the country, our country, including our ambassador to Israel right now, Mr. Huckabee, a longtime Baptist preacher who believes we're at the end of the world and you can't criticize anything Israel does. I want to point out to you here that our Lord Jesus Christ, sent from heaven, messenger of God, Messiah of Israel, pronounced condemnation upon the Israel of his day, the Jerusalem of his day, because they did not obey the prophets and they resisted the message of the Son of God. And he spoke a word of judgment on them. He discerned not only the political movements of his day toward rebellion and revolt, he also discerned the spiritual resistance to doing what the prophets said. Now, I have been using the phrase Micah, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Jesus was saying that the Jewish people of his day, his own people, Jesus was a Jew, his own people were falling under the judgment of God because they did not do justice, they did not practice mercy, and they did not walk humbly with God. And Jesus predicts a hard time upon the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, the Jewish city, the Jewish temple. And this ought to give us absolute freedom in our own day to challenge the political and religious policies of the Jewish people of our day, the Jewish people of Jerusalem. Now, some people will say, well, you're just being anti-Semitic. Anytime you say anything about what Israel is doing. I've been to Israel many times. I've lived in Israel. I lived in Israel during the Yom Kippur War. I remember seeing the jets fly overhead and the tanks come running down the street within sight of our apartment. Yom Kippur, 1973. I've been there. I've lived in Jerusalem through one of the great Arab-Israeli wars. And I love Israel. I love the Jewish people. I love the great Jew, Jesus. But as a nation, as a people, they are called to obey the prophets, to obey the commandments, to be a nation among nations, and to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. What we're seeing in Gaza violates every commandment of the Bible. And American leaders, including our president and our ambassador over there, need to rebuke Israel publicly, powerfully, consistently. We need to defend the fatherless in Gaza. We need to defend the Palestinians who are being abused, and not be afraid of being anti-Semitic, because the Palestinians themselves are Semitic peoples. Many of them are Christians. Not all of them. So this is the point I want to make about this text. Jesus has this portion of the scripture, the longest part of it, of this sermon. He has 4 verses about the questions, 4 verses about the way life is all the time. And then I think it's almost 20 verses in our text where he talks about the trouble that's coming to Jerusalem. Trouble's coming. Jesus understood the restlessness of the Jewish people around him, and he understood what that meant, that the Roman legions were going to come in and put down the rebellion. And of course, this is what happened about 30 years later, when the Jews revolted, led by Josephus, until he was captured up in Galilee. Vespasian, the Roman general, brought the legions in, led the campaign until he was called back to be the emperor, and his son Titus took over the Roman campaigns. So what I'm trying to get you to understand here is that the words of Jesus speak to us not only in the calm times of life, but also in the troubled times. Not only in times that are politically and publicly troubled, but in our own personal times, when we have to deal with disappointment and loss and failure and pain and even death, when we have to deal with failure and separation, bankruptcy and incarceration and addiction and divorce, the breakdown of things in our own lives. I've had to deal with lots of this in my immediate family. You've had to deal with some of this in your family, in your friends. You have looked for a way to be strong and steady and certain. You've looked for a place of spiritual strength. You've looked for a community of people who love you and care for you, stand by you, pray for you, bring you some vegetables out of their garden at the end of the summer because they know that you are under stress. That's the kind of friends we all need. Some friends like that are church people and some are not. I started this broadcast 30 Sundays ago with a burden and a need and a desire to speak to people who have quit church, quit the gathered community as we call it. I spoke to one of the singers last night in the Highway 52 band. He wanted to know if I was still preaching. I said, no, I've started this Sunday morning broadcast for people who have quit church. And he said to me, well, that's me, he said. He said, I'm a Christian. I try to live a Christian life, but I quit church many years ago. He went ahead to tell me about stuff, things he didn't like about church. We all have a list of things we don't like about church. We all have a list of things we don't like about schools and politics and organizations and even the homeowners association. Sometimes we have to navigate these things. I'm here to speak to you the words of Jesus Christ to help you, to help me live a life that's just, merciful, and humble, to be strong and certain and steady in a time of disruption. I hope this helps you with whatever faces you today or tomorrow. something you know about, something that's going to surprise you. God bless you today. I'd like to hear from you. Write me, call me, text me, email me, send me a message. Pray for me and this ministry. Pray for yourself. Pray for those around you that are in distress. I look out of the window in front of me, and in our parking lot right here, 2 emergency vehicles called over here to attend to somebody who's had an unexpected crisis today. May God give you strength, and God give you a source of stability and happiness this week, and bring you what you need to be the person God has called you to be. Thank you for joining us today, Sunday in the House. I'm Dwight Moody, your host. I'll be back here in the house next Sunday morning at 9 o'clock on this YouTube and Facebook channels. God bless you. Hope you have a great day.